Well, welcome to Fireside Chats here at the Center on Halstead. I have the pleasure this evening of interviewing none other than Chicago's own Rubberwilli Schendel. All right, tell us a little bit about where you grew up and about your family.
I was born in the Brewster Projects. No, that's RuPaul. That's it. I was born in Terre Haute, Indiana, and if you remember the show Family Affair, which was on in the 70s, that's where they were from, was Terre Haute. So I was born in southern Indiana, lived in a little town called Staunton for the first few years of my life. My father was an auto parts salesman. He worked for the Indiana Parts Warehouse, which was based in Indianapolis. He ran a warehouse in Terre Haute for a while, then got transferred to Indianapolis. And I spent the majority of my childhood in a little town just outside of Indianapolis called Brownsburg, about 15 miles west, just across the county line in Hendricks County. Brownsburg has been pretty much subsumed by Indianapolis at this point because Indy has just grown ridiculously. I have three sisters, two from my father's first marriage, Kelly and Rachel. They're the older two. Kelly was very smart. She went to the Indiana University School of Journalism. Rachel went to Indiana University as well. She was a cheerleader. Spent a lot of time at their high school events growing up. I have a younger sister named Angela. She now lives in Lafayette. She was a softball player when she was growing up. Redhead, can be a little temperamental sometimes. She is notorious for throwing a family-size can of Campbell's soup at me one time when she got angry, busted a hole in the wall in my mom's lovely 1970s wallpaper. That was not fun for me or her. Spent most of my life in Brownsburg, was very involved in show choir, madrigals, theater, all the things you would expect a little gay boy in Indiana would be involved in. So, but I was also the school mascot. I guess that kind of goes with being a gay boy in Indiana. And I was the manager of the football team in junior high. It was nothing, there were no sexy scenes in locker rooms or anything like that. It was just, practice stuff mostly, meaning that I was assisting in practice with, footballs and crap like that. So that was growing up.
What was the bedroom department store?
So I had a very active imagination as a kid. My father was a nice man, but he worked a lot. We didn't have the best relationship because I was the only boy of the four kids and I was not athletic. So we never had a great relationship. I spent a lot of time in my bedroom because I knew I'd get sent there eventually, so I might as well just stay there or start there. So I had a very active kind of imagination and creativity, and my mom started working, I guess I was like 6 or 8 years old because we were old enough to kind of stay at home as latchkey kids on our own. She got a job and was out of the house, and so we spent summers by ourselves. And this was the 70s, and my mom had a huge collection of clothes that she no longer wore anymore. And so I, at some point in time, decided that for playtime we would set up a department store. So I raided my mom's closet of unused clothes, and I created in our spare guest bedroom a department store. There was a lovely, it was all accessories and dresses for the most part. Lots of lovely scarves and handbags and paisley dresses of purple and pink. And that was the bedroom department store. There was also a post office, which my sisters did that. They took, my two older sisters, took a bunch of milk cartons, the square ones, and taped them together. And then they made a post office, and that was something they did with their imagination. So they would seal a bunch of envelopes and slot them in. And they would do deliveries. So this is what you did in the 70s because we didn't have the internet. So you came up with other ways to be creative. I also had a library. I still have a lot of books. And at one point in time, I decided to create a library in my bedroom closet. So I made card catalog cards for all my books, and neighborhood kids would come in and they would check out books, and they would be due back in 2 weeks, and yeah, so.
How much of fines did you collect?
I don't think I ever really collected any fines. I don't think I was that smart at that point in time, so. Definitely not what we were charging when I worked at IU libraries. That was, yeah, no, we didn't charge that, so.
But you were very involved in your church. How so?
I was very involved in my church. So the Bible Belt is kind of huge, and in Indiana, there's any number of denominations and groups. My next door neighbors, let me back up. My family itself, my mom came from a very religious family. She grew up Nazarene. She did not go to her prom at her school because they didn't allow dancing in her church. So they had a church prom, which I'm not really sure what you do at a church prom that doesn't allow dancing. I think it's drinking and socializing of punch and stuff like that. My dad got baptized after he did his military service. He was in the Middle East, and he came back and went to church and got baptized, and I think that was pretty much the end of it for him. Our next door neighbors, though, were holy rollers. Very evangelical, non-denominational, and they started inviting all the neighborhood kids to go to church with them. And they had a big conversion van at that point, and half the fun was just getting a ride in this totally awesome, decked-out van. It was so cool. And so we would go to church with them, and I really got hooked on the music. The music at that point in time, and in that church, was a lot of Gaither stuff. I don't know if anyone's familiar with the Gaithers, but they're a big musical operation in the Christian sphere, and they're based in Indiana, and it's very powerful stuff. They know what they're doing. It's very manipulative. They know how to elicit the emotions that they're looking for, we'll just say that. And so I got very involved in the musical aspect. When I was in high school, one of the groups was going on a summer tour. We were going to take a musical around, and it was going to Canada. But in order to be in the group that was traveling, you had to be baptized. And at that point, I wasn't, because I was afraid of the whole dunking under the water backwards. I thought I was going to drown. But I was like, okay, if I'm going to Canada, I have to get baptized. Whatever, I could get dunked. And they told me, oh, you're gonna pinch your nose before you go into water. I said, oh, okay, I could do this, So it wasn't probably the appropriate reasons to get baptized, but it was a trip to Canada. And so I did that. And then later I became involved. I went to what would be considered a mega church. Not as big as some of the mega churches now, but at that point in time, it was one of the big churches. And by the time I got really involved in the music portion, I was running the sound booth. So I would come in early. If church was going to start at 7, I would be there by 5:30 to bring out the amplifiers and set up all the microphones and run a rehearsal with whoever the soloist was going to be for that day, and all of that. And that was kind of how I was involved with my church. It was pretty intense, I would say. I was going to be a music minister. That's how intense it was. The first university I looked at was a Christian university in Johnson City, Tennessee, which is a teeny tiny little town. And this was a very conservative school. No instruments allowed at all.
Wow.
Because the only instrument that God has ordained is your voice.
Wow.
And so I was attracted because it was choral and I was a singer, and that would be good. I was a little concerned about the science aspects. They had science, but I didn't really quite understand what they were teaching. So, but that was the first college I looked at. I did not go there.
When you began struggling with the coming out process, you visited your minister. How did he advise you?
So, my younger sister and I had a fight one day, and she just kind of looked at me and said, I'm tired of living in the house with a fucking faggot. And I turned and looked at her and said, well, I'm here and I'm not going anywhere. What the fuck are you going to do about it? And she freaked out and ran in her room and started calling all her friends on the phone. And I freaked out because I realized I had just inadvertently come out to my sister at 15, maybe, 14. God, I can't remember how old I was. And so I went to the neighbors who took us to church because they were home and I needed some place that I could just kind of shelter and not deal with the situation while my mother kind of reamed my sister a new ass. What the hell did you do to him? So, push comes to shove, you're sitting at the neighbor's house who are very religious and, well, you know, you can talk to anybody at the church at any point in time. I decided to talk to my music minister because he seemed like he would be hip, you know. He's a music minister, come on. So I went and met with him. It took about 2 hours to get to the point of why I was there. And when I finally did, he spun around in his chair and he had this big row of books behind him. And there was a 3x5 card wedged between two of those books. It was the only one up there. And he whipped around, pulled that card out, and showed it to me and said, these are the verses you need to focus on. And of course, it was all the verses that we have all been preached at about, you know, you're going to burn and, you know, man shall not and all of this stuff. And I was like, oh, okay, that's good to know. Thank you. I'll definitely focus on this. This is good advice. Thank you. And I left and was like, okay, that's that. That's not what I was looking for. So I didn't think anything about it. I just went about my business and just kind of, you know, recloseted myself. And then the next weekend, I came back to do my thing in the sound booth. He was there, you know, getting set up. I had keys to the church, so I could get in and set up the sound booth. And he was there, and he just stopped and he said, how are things? I was like, oh, great, that really helped. Perfect advice. Really, it's been very helpful. Everything's good. He's like, okay. And we just went about our business. And the next weekend when I came in to unlock the sound booth and get things going, the locks had been changed, and there was a new list posted, and I was no longer on the sound booth group. Wow. So effectively, he locked me out of the church.
Wow.
And that was the last time I went there on my own. I went back a second time, much later when I was in college with my mom, and the preacher got on a tangent about the homosexuals. And I waited until he got done, and waited a little while later, and then I got up. I said to my mom, I have to go to the bathroom. I got up, and I went to the bathroom, and I sat in the lobby, didn't go back in. And my mom got up at communion and came out and said, I think we're done. I don't think we'll be coming back here. And she never went back. So,
wow.
Very supportive.
That speaks volumes, doesn't it?
She's a lot of people in college, and Marcus might be able to speak to this because he was there, I think, wish that they had my mom. When I came out to her, I think the third time, because I came out to her a lot, evidently, a couple times when I was drunk, but when I came out to her the third time and I wrote her a long letter, she wrote me a letter back and sent a card, and I took it to our group meeting in college and read it, and everybody was just like, I can't believe you got that kind of response, she's amazing, and people have told me this continually, that my mom is amazing, and I kind of agree, she's pretty amazing.
That's incredible. But you attended Indiana University in Bloomington, and what activities were you involved?
So I went to IU Bloomington, which, if any of you know anything about Indiana, Bloomington is this little oasis bastion of liberalism in the state, which is fabulous. So I went there to the School of Music at Indiana University, which is ranked continually in the top 3, if not the top 2 in the United States. Juilliard is the only place that continues to beat them. They have a wonderful program in opera. And I went to be a music educator and got very involved there. I was very involved in student government. They started a second division of the student government at that point in time called the Academic Assembly, which would represent the schools individually as opposed to where you lived, because everything was based on housing, and then they created a secondary division so they'd have like a House and a Senate. So that was cool. I was very involved in the gay lesbian group at Indiana University, which was called OUT. I was their publicity director, so I was responsible for making sure that the news got out about what the events were, and that involved helping plan Pride Week and all of our political protests that we did, and we were pretty darn active, I would say. It was a very motivated group of guys and gals. And we had a lot of support from the university as well, I think. And support for that group at the university has only grown since then.
Tell us about the campus kiss-ins.
So one of the political things that we did all the time, if there was any excuse to have a kiss-in, we would have a kiss-in. And so if you've never been to a kiss-in, basically what it is, it's a bunch of homosexuals just standing around, sucking face for as long as they possibly can to make a political statement. And we would hold kiss-ins in front of Ballantyne Hall, which is, at one point in time, the tallest academic building in the United States. It's a huge classroom building. We would hold them at the Sample Gates, which was the main entrance into the university. We would hold them at the president's house. Kind of any excuse that we could manufacture to suck face with some strange boy that just happened to be standing there, we would do it as a political statement. And we accomplished a lot with those. We raised a lot of eyebrows, we got a lot of press at the Indiana Daily Student. I think we changed a lot of people's minds and opinions about things, and yeah, we were a politically active group of 20-year-olds, to say the least.
Well, tell us about Mr. Schendel Goes to Washington.
So that's what my mom called my trip to Washington, D.C. to testify before a Senate committee. So as I mentioned, I was very involved in student government. And in September of 1992, our administration of Indiana University Student Assembly or Association was contacted by the United States Student Association looking for people to testify for this committee. And they discussed, and they said they were looking for a gay person to represent gay students, specifically on hate speech codes on college campuses. And hate speech codes, at that point in time, I don't think they exist that much anymore, but at that point in time, were intended to protect students from malicious speech that had an implied or expressed threat involved with it. So it was speech that was deemed to have gone across the line and could possibly indicate a threat to an individual or a group of individuals. And this was a big thing at that point in time, was hate speech. There was a lot of talk about hate speech. And there was a hearing that started because a bill was introduced by Senator Larry Craig, infamous toe tapper, introduced a bill that basically any college campus or university campus that had hate speech codes was going to be denied federal funding. And so this was one of the hearings. When the bill was introduced, it was referred to committee, and this hearing was held to hear public comment on that. So I got flown into DC for that. This was in September of '92. Had to look it up today because I couldn't remember what it was. And I was the guest of Senator Kennedy. He's the one who extended the invitation and paid all the bills. And it was a fascinating experience. It was, Senator Kennedy didn't actually show up to the hearing. He was dealing with other things, but I met with his aides. When I walked in, they said, "We've read all the testimony that's going to be given today. We want you to go first," which was huge. I was flabbergasted. And they said, "But you have to cut this because you're only allowed 5 minutes, and this is way more than 5 minutes of testimony." And at that time, I didn't know the process well enough. And so I was like, well, what can I cut? This is all integral. Like, I can't cut any of this. Like, how am I going to cut it? I didn't know that whatever you cut was still entered into the record as, additional testimony or additional remarks. So I just ignored them, and I just talked. And after I got done, the chair of the committee scolded me and said, ladies and gentlemen, we only have a certain amount of time. As you can tell, I like to talk, so. But it was Larry Craig, again, the infamous toe tapper who later got caught for having sex in an airport bathroom. Orrin Hatch and Strom Thurmond were the three who were there. And Strom Thurmond blew in, kind of said the only reason he was there was to congratulate the young lady from my state who came to testify, and I'm just so, it was kind of surreal. And then he blew back out the door. So yeah, it was a very interesting experience. At the very end, the thing that to this day I'm still kind of like, Larry Craig asked me, he said, I get criticism all the time. Why is it that you can't be criticized and that there should be some penalty for that on college campuses? And I was like, it's like, I don't really even know how to answer that. And afterwards, all of the people who testified that Senator Kinney had invited, we went to Union Station for lunch, and then we were sent back to the airport to fly home. We're sitting in the middle of lunch, and all of a sudden, I'm just like, out of nowhere, I'm like, because you are paid, you are a public representative. It's your job to take criticism. And Senator Kennedy's aide turns and looks at me and says, I'm glad you finally figured that out. So, but the bill stalled in committee, it never went anywhere, so.
That's great.
That was Mr. Schendel Goes to Washington.
But at Indiana University, you created the group Headspace. Tell us about that.
So, I was the publicity director for OUT, our gay student group, and we did a Pride week of events, and it was kind of boring. Let's just be honest, it was boring. And we were trying to find a way to spice it up. And I suggested, well, what if we did something that was, I don't know, S&M 101 or something, something that's going to be controversial, And everybody's like, yeah, let's try that. And who could we get to do that? And I'm like, well, I could see if there's someone at the School of Music who could do that. And there was an opera singer there who was like, oh, I'm from New York, I could totally do that. And so he offered to host, and we got a room, and we publicized it on our big list, SM 101, 5 o'clock, Valentine Hall, room 301. And we're like, okay, if we get 10 people, this will be good. Well, we had 40 people show up. Most of them were townies, which in Bloomington means you went to Indiana University and you either dropped out or graduated and never went anywhere, you just stayed, which is not such a bad deal. But a lot of these people were people we'd never seen before. It was a very pansexual group, very goth kind of group, lots of black, lots of long hair, lots of dark mascara. And so Joe, my friend, gets up to start this class, and he gets about 10 minutes in, and there's a complete revolt. Joe gets taken down, is removed as the speaker by the audience, and they take over. And they're talking about negotiation and safe, sane, and consensual, and I'm like, what the fuck just happened here? Like, we've lost control. And as it goes on, I'm like, wait, these people really know what they're talking about. Like, I don't know who they are, but they know what they're doing. And so we got done, and I said, I really don't think that we should, I said, I feel like there's something that just started here, and I don't think that we should let this go. Would you all be interested in doing something with this and taking this a little bit further? And that started off, I would say, a good 6 months worth of meetings that we held in the Indiana University trustee room, which is where the Board of Trustees meet, because we're a student group, we can meet anywhere we want. And we created a student group called Headspace, which was the second chartered BDSM student organization in the United States.
Incredible.
We modeled it after a group at, I think it was Columbia, called Conversio Virium. And they still exist, and Headspace still exists. And we did educational workshops, and we did a lot of things. I learned how to flog from one of my good lesbian friends there. And a lot of what I knew at that young point about BDSM came from that group and from this pansexual organization that we developed. So it was pretty intense. When I left out, I focused specifically on Headspace at that point. And it was a good group of people.
What was the boob chorus?
So one of the outgrowths of Headspace, one of the many outgrowths of Headspace, was a group called Lascivious Exhibitions, or LE. Bloomington is home to the Kinsey Institute, if you were not aware of that. So Bloomington is a little bit more sexually charged than a lot of other college campuses for a variety of reasons. And so out of the Headspace group came a group that was a little bit more performance and party oriented. And that group formed into a group called Lascivious Exhibitions with a friend of mine named Kelly McBride, kind of as the ringleader of that. And we basically put on fetish balls twice a year, at Valentine's Day and at Halloween. One was called the Erotic Arts Masquerade Ball, and the other one was the Eroticon. And the basic premise of it was, if you come in something fetish-oriented, so not just street clothes, you get it for $5. If you come in street clothes, you're paying $30. Wow. So it encouraged people to really get into the spirit of things. And the basic program for both of these events was the same. We would start off with very light entertainment of a sexual S&M kind of orientation, and we would progressively move through to something more hardcore. And so one year we started with the boob chorus, which was a bunch of women on stage wearing black hoods and gowns with the middle section cut off and their nipples taped over and their boobs hanging out. And it was basically a bell chorus with Also Sprach Zarathustra, the theme from 2001, playing over the intercom and a conductor in front. And so it was dun, 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 dun. And the crowd loved it, and it was hilarious. It was very visual and fun. And that was one of the ways that we started off the event that year. I think it was that year as well. Edible Beauties was one of the things we did. So we put people on a big tray, cover them in chocolate sauce and vanilla sauce, and surround them in fruits and vegetables, and we bring them out on a big dais and set them down, and the buffet is open, and that was fun as well. I was an Edible Beauty once. That was fun. And then one year we ended with a full suspension. And this guy was fucking hot. Still to this day, I'm like, God damn, he was hot. But he was backstage and getting these giant hooks just right through his back. And he walked down on stage, and they had rigged it, and they brought out a rig, and he's standing on stage, and they're just kind of, hooking him up. And then they kind of lift him up a little bit and roll the table out from under him, and he's just suspended there. And someone walks up and just pushes, and he's flying out into the audience. And these events were popular. I mean, we did them at Jake's, which was the big nightclub. And we had members of the IU football team there passing out. Several of them ran to the bathroom to hurl. I mean, it was that intense. And that was kind of the range of the evening. So for the boob course to a full suspension, every single time we tried to find that range of events. And yeah, it was an influential group. Rubber Zone, which was kind of the first rubber online site, also came out of that group, which I found out many years later when I joined. I didn't know that it was friends of mine who were running it. And they're like, oh my God. So that's a whole other story. Anyway.
How were you introduced to rubber?
I was still living in Indiana at that point. I had moved to Indianapolis, and I was working at the Children's Museum of Indianapolis. And a friend of mine invited me to go to Florida with him for a week-long vacation. It was like early January or something, 2000. And so I go down, and we're having great fun, and he's really vanilla, and I'm like, ugh, God, I really don't want to go to another fucking dance bar tonight. So I said, is there, a leather bar in this town? He's like, oh, there's an Eagle. He's like, oh, well, can you just drop me off at the Eagle tonight, and let's set a time to meet back up. So I went to the Eagle in Fort Lauderdale, which is now closed. And I had a great time. It was a great experience. I was like, thank God, real men. And they had a nice back room. And I was having a good time in the back room. It was so crowded that literally I was crawling out of the back room on my hands and knees. I'm wearing a pair of jeans and I think sneakers and a youth soccer shirt that I picked up at some, used clothing store because it looked hot. And I'm walking out and there's this really hot, bald German guy who goes walking by me. And I'm like, holy fuck, who the hell is that? And he's walking towards the door and I'm like freaking out. I'm like, okay, yeah, just go walk past him. And so he's standing by the door and I just walk past and he says, hello. And I'm like, oh my God. And so we strike up a conversation. Come to find out he is not German, but Germanic. He's Northern Italian, has some German in him, ancestry. He lives in Florida part of the year. And we just have a really good conversation. And he says, well, would you like to go out with me? I'm going to hang out a couple other places. And my training kicks in and I'm like, is there anyone here who knows you that can speak for you? And, I don't mean to be rude, but I don't know you. And he said, oh yeah, you could talk to him or him or him or him or him or this bartender. And I'm like, oh, okay. So everybody I talked to, oh, we know Max, he's great, he's a good guy. So I went with this guy. My friend showed up just about this time to pick me up, and I'm like, no, go, fine, I'm okay, good. I'll make it home, don't worry about it. So we go out dancing, we have a good time, and then the bars are closing, and he drives me back to the place where we're staying. And he says, well, I need to get going, I've got to drive, it's like an hour and a half back to my place because I live up by West Palm. I said, oh, do you want to stay here? So he says, are you sure? I'm like, yeah, they're asleep, they're never going to know. So he comes in and brings his bag, and we're getting ready to have sex. And he said, do you mind if I put my chaps on? And I'm like, yeah, sure, I love that, that'd be great. And I'm expecting leather chaps. So I'm looking the other direction, he unzips the bag, and I hear this strange sound. It's like, that was not a good version of it, but rubber makes this very unique sound. And I turned around and I was just like, what's that? And he's like, it's rubber. I was like, well, what's that all about? And we had a great time that night. We were both a little drunk, so it was not an extensive session, but it was fun and he was a nice guy. And we ended up spending the whole next day together, going to a tea dance at one of the different clubs. And he said, how long are you here for? And do you want to come back to my place in West Palm for a couple of days? I'm like, yeah, I think I would like that. And so I ditched my friends and spent the next 3 days in Lake Worth, which is just south of West Palm, at his place, having the most amazing sex I'd ever had in my life. And geared up in gas masks and rubber boots and wetsuits, and yeah, it was amazing. So 2000, with an Italian living in Florida, that's where I was introduced into rubber, and my life has never been the same.
How did you acquire your name, Rubberwilli?
So at the end of that session, he took me back to Fort Lauderdale to have dinner and to take me back to my friends who were very concerned about me at that point. I was a strange man. Like, oh, trust me, you're never going to know all the stories. And on the front of his Jeep, it said Rubber Max, and it had an Italian flag on it. And I had asked him, what's that? He said, oh, that's my nickname. That's what all my friends call me. And we got to talking, and he said, I think you're going to need a nickname as well. Because there's some websites you're going to need to join. There's this one called World Rubbermen, which is now known as Recon, and Rubber Zone. And he's like, but you're going to need to have a nickname for that. He's like, Rubber William, Rubber Bill, Rubber Max is already taken, because my middle name is Max. He's like, what about Rubber Willie? I was like, well, my mom doesn't like people calling me Billy, but I don't think she has an opinion on Willie. So I think that would be fine. He's like, but let's spell it differently. Let's just take off the A-M and leave it just W-I-L-L-I. That's a little German. I'm like, oh, I like that. So I got my nickname, Rubber Willie, from Max in 2000, and it stuck really hard. I don't think I could get rid of it if I tried.
How did MIR begin?
MIR started in, I think it was 97. Well, before that. So 95, 96, the Boston Renegades had started a contest with Vulcan American, which is a magazine called Mr. Vulcan Rubber. And they held a contest for a few years, and it was going well, but they hit some club politics, as clubs often do, and they just stopped holding the contest in Boston. And at that point, the title holder was Robbie Ryan, and he was like, look, I don't want to be stuck with this title. I don't want to be the last one. You guys need to figure something about this. And they didn't do anything. And he moved to Chicago at that point, and started talking to the guys at the cell block and wondering if they would be interested in hosting this Mr. Vulcan Rubber contest. And they said they would, and they started negotiations with Boston to hold the contest in Chicago. And so I think 96 maybe was the first, I don't have the dates, I'm bad with dates, very bad with dates. But I think 96 was the last Mr. Vulcan contest. And then the next year, the cell block was negotiating to hold the contest again, and the Renegades said, no, you can't have it. And so at that point, Roger Hickey and David Boyer and Patty decided that they would create their own contest. And part of that reasoning was they saw that there was this group of guys that really enjoyed the weekend. They just enjoyed getting together with guys who were into their very niche fetish at that point in time, and just having a weekend that was devoted to them and their kink and meeting other guys who were into their kink. And so the reason the contest got started was because, in large part, because Roger and the cell block recognized that this was a good group of guys who was looking for a good weekend to get together that was just for them. I think secondarily they realized that it was a good weekend for the bar, but MIR never made money. So it wasn't really a monetary thing for the bar. Roger Hickey always underwrote MIR in large part to make sure it was good. So that's kind of how MIR got started. That first year there was a competing contest that IML pulled together that I think was Mr. World Rubber, I think is what they called it. And so immediately after the contest at the cell block, everyone who did not win the title headed north to the Eagle and to the ballroom at Man's Country for the second rubber contest of the evening. And IML quietly shelved that contest after that year, and it never came back again. So that was how MIR got started.
Was that contest only that year, or had that been ongoing?
No, the Mr. World Rubber just happened that 1 year.
Oh,
so I think it was more, I wasn't there, but my gut reaction was it was more of an Eagle cell block kind of, there's going to be all these guys in, how do we get them up here? A lot of contests, as we all know, are created as a reason to get guys into the bar to spur business, and I think that's what that was. And I credit Chuck and the Eagle and everyone for recognizing this is something that can be more, and this is where it needs to happen. So it was a good thing.
How did you become involved in MIR?
So I met Max in January of 2000, and he kind of introduced me to rubber. And in May of 2000, I moved to Chicago. originally lived in Wheaton for a month. Went to my first IML in 2000, which was the last year it was at the Congress, which was fascinating. Rode in on the train from Wheaton in full leather. Parents herding their kids to the other end of the metro. Don't go near that man. And then I bought my first pair of rubber chaps from Mr. S, from Antonio. And I have a picture of me and Antonio. Me wearing my rubber chaps over my jeans with a wife beater on. Major faux pas. I would never do that ever again. But, you know, that's what I did. And then I stayed around and hung out and rode back home. And then we moved into the city, and I started hanging out at the cell block fairly regularly. And then I found out about the contest that they would hold every November, and part of my School of Music training kind of kicked in, and I went and watched the contest, you know, as an attendee. But I always have watched and attended these things with a critical eye. So I would see contestants get up on stage, and my inner dialogue would be, that's good. Well, that was a good answer. Yeah, that's a good answer. No, I would not have worn, oh God, that does not look good on him. That's not, no, not under those lights, that's not working. So I was going, and for 2 years, I was watching the contest, not knowing that I was preparing myself for a run for the title. And in 2002, I decided to enter the contest. At that point in time, I had become friends with pretty much all of the rubber guys, who at that point were not in Chicago. The majority of the rubber guys were not in Chicago. So I was familiar with all of the previous title holders. And at that point in time, every single judge on the panel was a previous Mr. International Rubber and Dave Rhodes, or a previous Mr. International Rubber and, I don't think Marcus ever did it. I think it was always Dave Rhodes. So it was a pretty steady group of people. And I prepared and got a lot of critique from Max. I took photos and sent them to him, and he helped me kind of, you know, figure out what to wear. And I entered the contest. It was my first contest ever, and I won. And I was convinced I was not going to win. There was a German competing against me who was a complete pervert, a kinky, twisted fucker. His name is Elmar Kohler, and I was convinced he won. And I think I've since figured out that Elmar was a bit too far for the judges panel that year, and that he probably would have freaked a lot of people out if he had won the title. And I think that's why I won. So I will never know, but that's my assessment of looking back all these years later. So 2002, I became MIR 2003.
Well, MIR has dramatically changed over the years. How so?
Well, a lot. It's no longer owned by Cell Block. We have a website, which we didn't have in the beginning. I think one of the biggest changes that happened to MIR was that when we moved out of the Cell Block and to the center on Halsted, one of the biggest changes was that the market became a viable option for vendors. When you do a contest in a bar, the vendors have to set up in the bar on, you know, the first day and then tear down at night for the event to happen, and then they have to reset up. And so it's a nightmare for vendors. And so that was a huge hindrance to growing the contest. I think we also just outgrew the venue, you know, and we realized that a long time before the contest got sold to MIR Contest, the current owners. But it was a difficult debate to get the contest out of the bar because, you know, at that point, you know, MIR was a big moneymaker. You know, it wasn't in the black, but it was still bringing a huge amount of money into the bar. So moving the contest out of the bar to expand the contest and let the contest grow would mean that the bar would lose money potentially because everything would not be happening there. So that was a huge issue that we went through, and the move to circuit was kind of a double-edged sword because we expanded the weekend to 3 days, And when we put the final portion of the contest on Sunday at Circuit, we saw attendance start to drop off because people were already going home. Their plan was to go home on Sunday so they could be at work on Monday. And yeah, so there's been a lot of change. It used to be, you know, everything was done by the bar, and I would kind of offer advice and, you know, what I thought would be a good move for it. And now we have a team of volunteers, which continues to grow. And I've delegated a lot of the responsibilities to members of the community, and they pretty much run their area. We don't even have that many meetings now, because it's really we've told them, you own your area, we trust you, you know, and it's also because a contest can't all live in one person's head. You know, when it's all in one person, if that person gets hit by a bus, the contest is screwed. And so you've got to delegate. And that's a hard thing for me to do. I'm a control freak by nature. And so delegating has been hard for me, but it's something I've been working on, and you know, we've got a good group of guys who take care of things. So I'm very fortunate in that. And I think the contest is as well.
Well, MIR has had its challenges. Please talk about some of the biggest challenges you faced with MIR, including the most current challenge regarding Jason Lynch.
Right, so there's been a lot of challenges with MIR. I would say there are three things that kind of stick out to me as kind of the worst moments in MIR history, and these are very personal to me. So I'm caveating that. These are very personal. One of these is, I don't think, known to the larger public until today. So there was a point in time when the contest was being held at the bar, where on the night that we've just finished the contest and we're getting ready to announce the winners, and I was physically prevented from announcing the winners.
Wow.
Because we knew that the minute we announced the winners, the bar was going to empty out. And that was not something that the bar wanted. And it was so bad that one of our judges walked out. Screamed at me, yelled at me, said, "I know you have the results in your waiters and that you're not announcing them. This is bullshit. I'm out." And walked out. And I was mortified because this is somebody I knew and I invited to be a judge, but my hands were tied. And it was extremely frustrating for me. And I just couldn't do anything about it because I didn't have the power. So that was kind of the first kind of horrible thing that happened. I think the second thing that happened, and I'm kind of going in chronological order towards today, was that there was a year when we were at Circuit where one of our tally masters didn't show up, and so we only had one person who was the tally master. And we announced the winners, and everything's great, and we go to Sidetrack afterwards for our annual after party, and I get home, and it's like 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'm just kind of looking over the score sheets, and I realize that there has been a massive mistake in the tallying. That I think this was just after we had gone to Olympic scoring, and the highs were not subtracted, they were re-added, and so we had announced the wrong winner. And actually, it ended up that someone who was in 4th actually moved up, and someone who was in the top 3 was going to drop out. So it's Monday morning, and I'm sitting in my apartment, and I'm kind of freaking out. And I get on the phone with the cell block, and I'm like, this is what I just discovered, and how do you want to proceed? You own the contest, and I'm told, well, you're the weekend coordinator, and you're the one who hired the tally master, so you need to figure this out. Which is fine, I accept that. I was the one who was supposed to look at the scores, and I didn't. So that's all horrible enough. The worst part is calling up a friend of yours who you have just announced has won Mr. International Rubber and telling him that he didn't win. and that all these pictures that have been taken of him, it was just a horrible experience. I bawled my eyes out on the phone trying to do this, and he was like, what the hell happened? Oh my God. And so, and he was a great sport about it. The complicating factor in that is that it's an international contest, and some of the people who you're needing to get a hold of to tell that their position has changed are on planes or have already landed in their foreign country, and you're trying to control the message until you can get a big announcement out, and that didn't work so well. Told one of the contestants who was traveling with a club member, and the club member immediately shoots out an email blast about scandal at Mr. International Rubber, scores tallied wrong, and I'm freaking out. And yeah, so it was a pretty horrific couple of days. But in the end, we were complimented by numerous people on how well the situation was handled from a public perspective. And again, a lot of the trauma is, it's me. This is, it's the way I react to the way I feel about it. And it's a very personal kind of thing for me. And then most recently, the situation that we've had this year is that our current title holder, Jason Lynch, passed away very unexpectedly in February. His partner came home and found him unconscious in their apartment, and he couldn't be revived. And so it was just horrible. And I, immediately started calling all of my friends who run contests and do this, asking them, what do we do? What's the precedent? What do you do in your contest? And I have not to date found a single contest that's had to deal with a current title holder who has passed.
Wow.
So this was completely uncharted territory, and our rules have never addressed that issue. We've never addressed title succession. So this was a completely new area for us. And in the end, we decided that in this circumstance, we were not going to pass the title on to someone else. That Jason did not do anything to disgrace the title. He didn't step down. It wasn't like he ended up in jail or was caught selling drugs or any of that. And we felt that the best way to honor his memory and the work that he had started was to keep him as the 16th Mr. International Rubber. And our first and second runner-ups agreed with that. They actually said point blank, we don't want the titles. And they are instead choosing to represent Jason and his year at events where they've been invited to attend in his honor. So it was a very tough few weeks to get through that and to that decision, and then it took us about 2 months to get to the point where we felt we could announce it, that we had talked to everybody that we needed to, and given his partner enough time to get through his process of grieving, which is still going on, obviously, but to get to a point where he felt that he was comfortable with that announcement going out. So, and we've only announced a few things that we're doing at this point. There's a whole series of things that we have planned, but we didn't want to, we didn't want to announce all of that up front. We want there to be subtle remembrances of Jason that happen throughout the course of the year, as opposed to bombarding everyone all at once, because we've always done a celebration of life at MIR, but it is a celebration of life. We try not to bring the mood of the event down, because we realize that these people would want people to have fun and enjoy the weekend for what it is, which is why they come. And so we try to keep that in mind as moving through this, that we need to get to a point where we can enjoy the weekend again and make sure that everyone is having fun, because that's what the weekend is about. That's what these guys were there to represent.
Well, building on that a little bit, earlier this year, you were one of two people caring for our beloved Chuck Windu. How did that experience change you?
Well, I would say massively and just leave it there, but I don't think you're going to go for that answer. So, God. It was a transformational experience for me, I would have to say. I will be upfront, and I've told anybody who asks me about this. Chuck and I were not the closest of friends. Chuck and I were involved in a club, the Chicago Leather Kennel Club, which you were involved in, and most of the people who are here tonight were involved in. And that's how I knew Chuck. And when the club dissolved and when that happened, Chuck kind of pulled back from the community. And I didn't see Chuck. A lot of my relationships, it's one of the pitfalls of being who I am, are professional and related to that professional sphere, that aspect of the rubber thing. And so I was honored and flabbergasted when I was asked to be one of the two to help him through this process. And it was life-changing because I've never personally been, up until that point, I'd never been that close to someone nearing the end of their life. And it's just a life-changing experience to try and watch someone pack 30 years of life into 7 days, because they know that they're not going to be in this space anymore. And Dean and I, one of the outcomes of this, and one of the ways this changed me, was that Dean and I have become a lot closer. He was the other person who was there with me during that process. Our focus during that whole period was, what does Chuck need to do? He was very frail at that point, losing energy a lot. And our goal was, what do you want to accomplish in the next 7 days? Because at the end of that 7 days, his family was coming to pick him up and take him home. So we sat down and made a list, and then we prioritized the list, and Chuck decided what he was going to do. And we were there simply as his hands to help him through that process. It was extremely difficult on multiple levels. It's difficult to watch somebody go through that process. I held it together, I think, really well until the last day. And when Chuck started to lose it, because he held it together really well as well, but when he started to lose it because he realized this was the last 45 minutes he was going to be in his apartment, and in Chicago, I lost it. I lost it several times during that day. It was difficult to be a gatekeeper, because Chuck was very adamant that there were things he had to get done, and he wanted to see people, but there were too many people to see, and he knew he couldn't get accomplished what he needed to get accomplished if he saw everybody, and it was emotionally draining as well for him. And so that gatekeeping was very difficult as well. To tell friends, I'm sorry he doesn't have the energy to see anyone today, or he's sleeping, or so it was a difficult but also rewarding experience. Getting to spend that much time with him intimately, and discuss his life and things that we had all done together, and it really brought home to me the impact of what we did as the Chicago Leather Kennel Club. The number of guys that we touched and how we changed their lives, and what good work we did, even though it all crashed in horrible flames, as many clubs do when power and politics get involved. The work we did was good, and I think all of us who are involved in that club are still doing that work, just not within a club framework. That legacy goes on, and that legacy is Chuck. And I think that will be. So it was a powerful experience, and something I'm fortunate to have been part of. And yeah, I'll leave it there.
So the last question I have for you, and this is one that I like to ask everyone who sits with me for an interview. What's the biggest misconception about you?
People tell me all the time that I intimidate them, or that I'm intimidating. And I don't think people should find me intimidating. I think I see that as a combination of two things, which I think are misunderstandings. Well, one of them is a misunderstanding. One, I'm tall. I'm 6'4", and a lot of people find that intimidating. So maybe that is intimidating to some people. The other thing is, I'm really shy. I do not do well with meeting people. I hate initiating, and I think this is, I spent a lot of time in therapy trying to figure out a lot of stuff. My therapist should answer some of these questions. But I think my shyness comes off as standoffishness a lot. And I think that gets pulled into that whole intimidating kind of thing. So, you know, I would say that's the biggest misunderstanding about me is that, you know, I'm a nice guy. Once I get to know someone, you know, once I get over that initial hurdle of meeting someone, I'm great. I'm cool with it. But you know, it's that initial meeting someone that it's just drives me crazy. I've never been good at that. So that's that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For an amazing interview. And now, if anyone has a question, we do still have the cameras rolling.
I'm good at that.
Okay.
Do you want to?
No, I can project.
Oh yes, he's a theater major.
Theater major, sing out, Louise.
Yes.
So-
Shall I
so
stay? Okay.
My first question is about your father and your family relationship. You talked about how you had four sisters.
Three sisters. Yeah, three sisters.
And you were the only boy.
Yep.
And you weren't very athletic.
Right.
Your relationship with your father, you didn't really talk a lot about that, except you said it wasn't much of a relationship. Did he project disappointment on you, and do you think that affected how you developed as a man?
So just in case the video didn't hear that, didn't talk a lot about my relationship with my dad. Did he project disappointment on me, and did that affect how I developed as a man? Well, I'll say my dad and I had a good relationship when I was younger. So when I was really young, I spent a lot of weekends working in the auto parts store with him. So he would go, you know, he worked 6 days a week. And on Saturdays, I would often get up with him at like 5 o'clock in the morning, and we would hop in the truck and we would go off to the store and we would get our hair cut, and then we would go to Stacy's and we would have breakfast, and we would always sit in the same chairs and have the same waitress, and 2 eggs over easy, bacon, toast, you know, it's always the same.
Sounds good.
It was great. Stacy's a great little Greek diner in Plainfield, Indiana. And then I would go spend the day at the auto parts store, and I would, you know, stock the shelves with, you know, Quaker State oil and, you know, WD-40, and I, you know, clear the shelves and clean them, and, you know, hang tailpipes and sort fan belts and, you know, all this kind of crazy, very butch, you know, macho stuff. My dad was also an official with USAC, which is the United States Auto Club, and they are a scoring agency, so they do a lot of auto racing, and he and I would spend summers going to auto races. We converted the back of the pickup truck into a camper, and so we would go around to all of these car races, and my dad would score Tom Sneva, and in the Indianapolis 500 he was a scorer. I never got to go to the 500 with him, but he would score Mario Andretti. And before all the digital stuff, scoring was very important. So you pushed your timer when your driver crossed the start-finish line, and that was their official time for crossing the start-finish line. Now that's all automated. So we had a lot of good father-son bonding time when I was younger. I would say things started to change when I got into junior high, and sexuality starts expressing itself, and I got involved in the theater and drama and choir, and my dad never verbalized it. He was never mean to me. He just kind of lost interest in those things. I got a lead in the high school musical my freshman year, the Pajama Game. I was Prez. I had 2 big solos, or a solo and a duet. And my mom was ecstatic, and my dad fell asleep. And we had the cast party afterwards at our house, because we had just remodeled it. We opened up the living room, dining room, kitchen, and family room into one giant great room. We had 45 high schoolers in our living room just screaming, theater students, crazy. And he slept. He went back to his bedroom and slept through it. I think when my mom and dad got divorced, the divide kind of widened. And he worked hard, you know. I mean, he worked really hard. He was running his own business, and, you know, he was paying child support to 2 older kids, and, you know, supporting a family, and, you know. So I think there were a lot of factors there. I wish he was here. He's been dead for 7 years now. He committed suicide, which I'm fine with that, because he was dealing with terminal issues himself. I wish he would have done it a different way so we could have prepared us all for it. But, you know, it's his decision. So, yeah, I don't think it's a long way to get to. I don't think it affected my development as a man. I think I was going to end up being this way regardless. I think what would have affected it was when I was a kid, I needed a lot of structure, and I wasn't getting it in high school. And at one point or in junior high, and at one point they threatened to send me to Culver Military Academy, and I was petrified. I was just scared to death that they were sending me away. And I look back on it now, and I've met a lot of guys who went to Culver who are gay. And I'm like, God, what a great experience that would have been. So I don't know what path my life would have taken at that point, but, you know, yeah.
Okay.
Other questions?
Thank you. Yes, I do have other questions.
Yes, please do.
When your sister came at you with the whole outing sort of event, and you were struggling with that, and you went to the ministry to actually kind of set your head, did it ever cross your mind that you might not be gay, or that you would not want to be gay, or did that ever impact you or make a realization of, you know what, that still isn't right? I mean, with that whole religion thing, because there's a big dichotomy there.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. So yes, when I went to, just to repeat for the video, when I went to my minister and talked about that I thought I was gay, did I ever doubt that? Did I ever not want to be gay? Was that ever an issue? Yes. I did. I fought with it for a long time. Can't believe I'm going to say this. I stole some of my mom's Playgirl magazines. Or she was throwing them out, and I found them, and I kept them in my closet in a box on the top shelf. And I would go through these regular phases where I would throw them out because I couldn't have those around me, and they were bad, and I didn't want to be gay, and I had a lot of internal struggle with it. It was all internal though. A lot of it I think was based on I think a lot of my struggle was peer pressure in high school and junior high. I had a crush on, a lot of boys that I was in high school with. One of them I'm friends with now on Facebook again, and we're going to see each other for the first time in years at our 25th high school reunion. But he's a Republican now. God, how could you do that? God, it's so gross. So I tried to like girls, but I wasn't attracted to them. I remember there was a girl I had a crush on, Kristen, and she was gorgeous, gorgeous. I can appreciate she was gorgeous, but just didn't. There was nothing. Wasn't stirring the heart, wasn't stirring the dick. So I eventually came out to my best friend in high school in the back of the theater after rehearsal. It was kind of, once I accepted it, I was all in from there on out, and I didn't question, I think after that, it was trying to negotiate the coming out process and the social acceptance and telling mom and, there were a lot of family members I didn't tell for a long time because they weren't really active in my day-to-day life. Kind of same thing with my HIV. I didn't tell a lot of family members because you're not really in my day-to-day life. You don't need to know this information. And I don't want to burden you with it. So, yeah, that's that.
Okay, I have one more.
One more.
Just one more. The whole thing about a nickname, I'm just curious as to why Rubber Mac said you had to have a nickname. What was the purpose of that?
I think the purpose of Max saying that I had to have a nickname was because at that point in time, Rubber Zone was pretty much it, or at that time I think it was called Rubber Men, was pretty much it, and you were going to have to create a profile there. And I think the whole purpose of that was so that he'd know which profile to look for on the website. I really think that was the driving force behind that. Yeah, I think that was kind of it. I mean, we hit it off. I mean, we really connected on a very deep level that I really connected with very few people on that level, emotionally, spiritually, sexually. And yeah, I think this was, we were adamantly trying to find ways to stay connected because, he's not a US citizen, he's an Italian citizen, he's only in the United States, he's only allowed to be here for, I think it's 3 months out of the year, without going through the whole process of, immigration, naturalization, and that takes forever. So he was only here for January, February, a little bit of March, and then he left, and they came back in May, right before IML, or right after IML, for, I think, 3 weeks to do taxes and some other paperwork on his real estate that he has in the United States. So a lot of that, I think, was driven by us trying to find ways to stay connected, which we did. My first digital camera I bought because of Max, because we would send each other little scenarios, and we would act them out solo and take photos and send it back and forth to each other. And I mean, it was really intense and crazy horny at that point in time. And there was, I got into chat rooms because of him, and and all of those things were Rubberwilli, And if you look anywhere online, everything that's associated with me is Rubberwilli. I didn't choose that when I won the title. I didn't choose Rubberwilli as a stage name. That was how I was known in the community. And I think that a lot of the guys who compete for MIR and go by a name other than their given name, that's because that's how they're known. The internet has kind of changed a lot of things in how we interact. And I think for rubber guys specifically, there can be a big distance between them and the nearest rubber guy that they're going to be able to interact with in a physical manner. And the internet has been really great for the rubber community in that they've all been able to bond on these websites and get to know each other. And then when they come to MIR, or they go to IML, or they go to their regional rubber contest, which has come along in the past 10 years, they can find each other, and those are the names that they go by. I remember when Master Mike Zool and I hosted the first World Sites party at IML, because Recon wasn't hosting anything in the United States at that point in time, and people were pissed. We had name tags, and we were telling people, don't write your name, write your screen name, write your username, because that's how everybody knew each other. And I think that's one of the big changes we've seen. But, scene names, it's not about a scene name, it's about a screen name or a username. That's what a lot of people are going by, So that's kind of a long answer to that one. But again, I like to talk. Any other questions?
Certainly.
Oh, good. Marcus has one. Yes!
I have more than one question.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
So
Marcus knows me well, too, from college, so.
I was there at that first meeting that Headspace grew up.
He was. I think at the Noble Romans.
Yes, I posted a Headspace flyer on my dorm room.
At Collins.
Dorm room door,
Yeah.
which made half the dorm not talk to me.
At Collins? That's kind of shocking, but
Yeah,
anyway.
But you were talking about how at some of the MIRs, people started spilling down to show tunes at Sidetrack. And I've actually seen that be one of the ways that there's been a lot of growth, especially with newer and younger men coming into the community. That has become a post-IML tradition. It's grown into a monthly event even.
Yeah.
And I had no idea how that started.
So yeah, basically how did show tunes become part of IML and MIR? Well, I think it's been part of, well, I don't know how long Bill has worked at Sidetrack. It seems to me like forever. But there has always been a leather contingent at Sidetrack, working or just going. And I think if we look back in history, I mean, I think, this is really harkening back to my IU days, but it tends to be that the educational level of people into kink tends to be higher.
Yes.
And this is borne out by a lot of studies, that people who tend to be into kinkier sex tend to have a higher educational level. And they also tend to be more into the arts and those kinds of things. And show tunes are a form of art. And so I think that that's just kind of a natural fit, at least here in the United States. I think that the reason it's been so successful for MIR is that MIR can be a pressure cooker. It's very intense, can be very intense. You've got 4 days, where all these rubber guys are showing up from the 4 corners of the earth, and they're all going to be in one space, and you want to meet as many of these people as possible, and you want to have crazy kinky sex while they're here in town, and you want to make sure that you get into the demo space with them and, do whatever you want to do and try whatever gear you want to do. And, it can be a very intense, build-up. And then we announce the winner on Saturday night, and then on Sunday, everybody's starting to go home, and you need a little bit of release at that point in time. And we've just found over time that show tunes is just the perfect release for the weekend. It's the perfect opportunity for people to say, fuck it, I'm exhausted, I can't fuck anymore, I have no energy to tie somebody up anymore, I just need to do something that's fun and off the hook crazy. And I think show tunes is not so scary for people, which I think has been fun as well. I think there's been a lot of conversion at show tunes of vanilla guys who are, what's that? Can I feel that? And I think we become approachable at that point in time. It's not so scary. It's not like Sidetrack is not a dark, scary bar, and we're mixing and mingling with everyone. And typically the sisters are there as well. And so, it can be a bit of a freak show, but I don't think people are just interested. They're genuinely interested. And the rubber guys are having a good time at that point in time. Their guards down, they're just there to have fun. They are probably enjoying a few libations as well. And so I think it's the right mixture. And we have seen that change here a lot in Chicago and grow. And now we have there's a monthly gear tunes that happens now on the 3rd Monday of every month at Sidetrack. A bunch of guys just show up in gear and hang out in an area of the bar, and it's a Monday night. But people enjoyed that event so much they wanted it to happen on a regular basis, and it happened on its own. Nobody kind of officially said, we need to do this more often. Someone just said, I want to do it more often, and created it, and I think that's great. So I think it's been a good thing overall.
We do need to wrap it up here at the center, but if anybody would like to go and have dinner, we can continue there, but it's after 9 and we do need to wrap it up here with the center. So
Thank you all for coming.
thank
I
you,
appreciate it.
everybody.